Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp and I'm the Executive Editor for Dataversity. We would like to thank you for joining today's Dataversity webinar, Business Value from MDM, the second in the 2015 year in a monthly series called Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken, brought to you in partnership with Data Blueprint. Now let me give the floor to Megan Jacobs, the webinar organizer from Data Blueprint, to introduce our speaker and today's webinar. Megan.
Thanks, Shannon. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are so pleased that you found the time to join us for today's webinar on business value from MDM. As always, a big thank you goes out to Shannon and Dataversity for hosting us. We'll get started in just a few moments after I let you know about some housekeeping items and introduce your presenter. We have 1 hour for the presentation, followed by 30 minutes of Q&A. We'll try to answer as many questions as time allows, but feel free to submit questions as they come up throughout the session. And to answer the top 2 most commonly asked questions, yes, you will receive an email with links to download today's materials and the webinar recording so you can view it afterwards. The materials will be sent out within the next 2 business days. And you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We've set up the hashtag DataEd on Twitter. So if you're logged on, feel free to use it in your tweets and submit your questions and comments that way. We'll keep an eye on the Twitter feed and we'll include answers to those questions in our post-session email. Now, let me introduce you to our presenter. Peter Aiken is an internationally recognized data management thought leader. Many of you already know him or have seen him at conferences worldwide. He has more than 30 years of experience and has received many awards for his outstanding contributions to the profession. Peter is also the founding director of Data Blueprint. He has written dozens of articles and 8 books, the most recent being Monetizing Data Management. Peter has experience with more than 500 data management practices in 20 countries and consistently named as a top data management expert. Some of the most important and largest organizations in the world have sought out his Data Blueprint expertise. Peter has spent multi-year immersions with groups as diverse as the U.S. Department of Defense, Deutsche Bank, Nokia, Wells Fargo, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and Walmart. He often appears at conferences and is constantly traveling. Peter, where are you today?
Actually, just across town from you, Megan, even though we haven't seen you yet today. So I'm down at Virginia Commonwealth University, my primary home base, and I'm very happy to be here. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Last month, we had a really terrific webinar with my CEO, Louis Broom, talking about data strategy. And one of the things, of course, that you need to have a strategy is around your MDM implementation. So just a little bit of brief context here. We collectively believe in the data management community that data is our most powerful, yet underutilized and poorly managed organizational asset. It is our sole non-depletable, non-degrading, durable strategic asset. Some people say data is the new oil or oil, depending on which way you want to do it. I kind of like the oil because it's a little bit less dirty than oil. But either way, it's an important component. We actually saw this t-shirt recently, too. Data is the new bacon. Whatever we need to do to sell it, our mission is to unlock business value by strengthening your data management capabilities, providing tailored solutions and lasting partnerships with our constituents that we have here. So again, today's topic here is unlocking business value through master and reference data management. We tend to talk about MDM quite a lot, but reference data is as important, if not more important, as we go through it. What we're going to do for today's hour of presentation is I'll give you my standard data management overview, which is important to help set the context in all of this. And then we're going to move to what is reference and MDM, why are they important, what are the basic building blocks that we need to have in order to put them in place. We'll finish up at the top of the hour with some guiding principles, best practices, and takeaways, and then move to the Q&A session, which is the part where you all ask us a bunch of questions that we then incorporate into the presentation for next year so that we can pull it all together and continually keep learning as a community. Now, when we're talking about data management, we've used this picture quite a bit to describe this. If you look on the left-hand side, there are sources of information and there are uses of information. And our friend Tom Redman likes to point out that the most important parts of a data lifecycle are when it is in fact captured and when it is used. Everything that happens in between there, however, is the provenance of data management. And this consists of data engineering, data storage, data delivery, and data governance. And these are specialized team skills that they don't tend to just be available to organizations if they haven't specifically gone out and sought for them. We do have to recognize, though, and this is maybe where some of you all can help, that as you're implementing these things, you're executing engineering, storage, and delivery in the context of governance. And your organization is already doing this. Now, if you're not doing it formally, and if you're not paying attention to what's going on, or if you're not trying to scope it within reasonable uses of this, it's very, very difficult to do it well. So this is really what the data management profession is dedicated to, is improving these practices. And one of the things we could improve is this articulation of it, because even though we're very happy with this diagram, it really does not well depict what we really want to show out of here, which is that you have some smaller number of sources, but then a large number of reuses in the entire context in here. So again, I'll put that out there as a challenge. Some of you may have better ideas. I know there's several of you that have interacted with me on these things, and we have actually come up with some very, very useful context and improvements to the articulation all the way around. Now, one of the other important components of this is to understand fully that also data management is in many ways like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Some of you remember this from high school. The idea is that if your food, clothing, and shelter needs are unmet, it's very unlikely that you're going to be doing things that help you self-actualize. When we look at data management, it actually works in exactly the same way. Here's our golden triangle of what I call advanced data management practices. Most people don't understand these as data management practices. They understand them in isolation. So we have wonderful colleagues that do all sorts of things with data mining. And of course, big data has become more important recently, analytics, warehousing. So MDM, of course, today's topic on all of these things. But failing to understand that that is really just the tip of the iceberg that you're using in data management, and that if you are not putting in place foundational data management practices to support these things, there's no way that you can do this well. So these foundational practices need to be in place before you start to do these other things in order to do it. And one other point on all this is that these 5 foundational practices, we'll talk about them in a second, governance, quality, data management strategy, data operations, data platform, and architecture, are only as strong as the weakest link. So in this example that I'm showing you here, excuse me, the data management and platform capability, architecture capabilities are not at the same level of strength as the others. And that while you can continue to invest in data governance, data quality, data management strategy, and data operations, it makes more sense for this particular organization to invest in data management platform and architecture, because that is the weak link in the chain that they have, and the entire foundation is only as strong as the weakest link. One of the questions that we constantly get is that these things up at the top in the golden triangle are really technologically focused, and that what we should be focusing on instead are capabilities at the organization, because the technologies have and will continue to improve and evolve over time. Of course, the other thing that we get a lot is that people say, well, can we just skip the hard stuff? I understand all that stuff about needing a foundation, but I really want to do data mining. And the answer is absolutely, you can do it without becoming proficient. However, anything that you try in that golden triangle will take longer, cost more, deliver less, and present greater risk to the organization than if instead you crawl, walk, and run your way towards what you're really trying to achieve in data management. Some of you are familiar now that the Carnegie Mellon University SEI Institute has done a terrific job of putting out a data management practice model, DMM. It's a one-slide overview from it. Melanie Mecca has done a couple of webinars with us, and she's also going to be appearing at the upcoming Enterprise Data World that all of us will be gathering in just a few short weeks, in fact, to talk about some of these topic areas. And that these are now well-defined and industry standards. And just very, very briefly, data management strategy is coming up with a strategy to manage the data coherently. Governance helps us manage the assets more professionally. Data quality maintains fit-for-purpose data in an effective and efficient manner. That the platform and architecture talks about specific implementation details that are relevant to your organization. And finally, engineering is an implementation component. We also, of course, have supporting practices that we look at as well from an organizational support perspective. Now, within that context here, we have the data management body of knowledge put together by DAMA International. I was president of the organization for a couple of years, and again, DAMA will be out in force at Enterprise Data World in just about 6 weeks or so. The goal here, of course, is another de facto standard where we've now formally defined what it means to do data management in these areas. And of course, you can see that the reference and master data management is there about 5 o'clock on this wheel. We also would like people to understand that part of the goals of all of these seminars is for you all to become more proficient as data management, evidenced by the certificate in data management professionalism. The key here, of course, is that we're seeing more and more jobs that are requiring this or giving preferential treatment to people who have this particular distinction. So that's our very brief overview of data management. Now let's dive into a very quick story here again about how an organization tried to deal with an MDM. So first of all, we're going to go to year 1 of this, and there was confusion as to a very large MDM implementation that had been put in by IT for a perfectly good reason. The problem was that they forgot also to incorporate quality and governance as part of that initiative, and they focused strictly on implementing the MDM as a technical solution. So the business, this was kind of fun, the business would say things like, well, I don't know how to use the MDM, like it was a car that you would turn on and put it in place. And there was general agreement in this area that they needed to restart the effort. So they spent literally millions more to go back and re-implement this. When a root cause analysis was done on that problem, the consensus was very definitely that they didn't have good quality data in the MDM. Now, again, the data is going to be only as good as the quality of the data in it. Again, it represents one of those weak links in the chain. But on the other hand, it was also critical to implementing some of the technological components that this organization was trying to do. So the organization turned around and said, well, get data qualitying right now. And again, having inexperienced folks in that area, they put up some quality, so it was able to sort of shore up the MDM. But at the same time, from a perspective, their data quality practices were relatively immature, again, taking a very technological focus and buying tools in an attempt to solve the problem. Now, I haven't really explained what MDM is, but that's not an untypical perspective on this. I'll give you some numbers a little later in the webinar here where you can see how many of these things are challenged. And let's be very clear, the MDM software packages work. They are very good. But again, lack of the understanding of how to use the tool, we have a saying, a tool in the hands of a fool, of course, is an issue. So let's look, and this is from the DAMA Guide to the Data Management Body of Knowledge. Here, it's the one-page summary of reference and master data management. It kind of gives us a roadmap of where we're going to do. We're going to look at the left-hand side of the diagram, which talks about the inputs, the suppliers, the participants, the activities in the teal box in the middle. There are some tools, and you can see the tools below the teal box that are there, and some specific deliverables that come out in terms of both requirements, documentation, but also consumers and goals that consumers have, as well as metrics around the master data management initiative in here. And you can see that the goals of this are to provide authoritative source of reconciled high-quality master and reference data, to lower the cost and complexity through reuse and leverage of standards, as I said on that very first chart that we looked at, and to support better business intelligence information integration. Some people are extending this out into analytics as well in order to look at these things. So let's get to a definition, and then the first important thing to realize within this context is that MDM is a discipline or a strategy. It's not a thing. It's a strategy where business and IT work together to ensure uniform, accurate, semantically persistent stewardship, accountability of the enterprise's official shared master data, which means you're going to have to come up with a definition of what master data means for your organization. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone in to help organizations with their MDM initiatives, and I'll say, what is your specific definition of master data? And they kind of go, we're still arguing about that. Well, you know what? If you're still arguing about it, you shouldn't be spending any money on trying to implement it, because it's a very, very slippery concept in many organizations. So a good definition is the enterprise's official consistent set of identifiers, extended attributes, and hierarchies, We can actually extend this into the taxonomy and ontological components as well. And the core parties, as you might imagine, to this are parties, the customers, the prospects, the people, the citizens, the employees, the vendors, the suppliers, the trading partners, the things that are important to your organization, understanding them, the places, the locations, the offices, the regional alignments, the geographies, and the things, accounts, assets, policies, products, services, that are important to your organization, and more importantly, that if they are not managed well, you will have a challenge around this, and many organizations experience this challenge. So, if you will, the parties, the places, things, some people say persons, places, and things, it's actually better to abstract that concept up to parties, because if you say only people can exist in the MDM, then how do you talk about doing business with organizations and things like that? So really, we like to say parties, places, and things, but it's very important, again, for you all to define these precisely. Now, let me give you one piece of million-dollar consulting advice on this, and that is when you define this for the first time for your organization, call it the first definition of your MDM entities. Because if you call it the first version, that implies there will be a second version as you get better at this, as you add more things, as you understand more about how to apply the technology and how it can become useful to your business. So absolutely define the first version, but let people know it is the first version and that there will be a second version coming out as you get to know these things. One of the things that's interesting for our profession, and I ask audiences this all the time, is that accounting as a profession literally has many millennia of history around it. Certainly the double entry accounting system was invented the same year as the Gutenberg press, and many people wonder which was the more important development in that area on this. We haven't been doing master data management for a long time. We've been maybe say 50 years, 100 years if we really stretch it in order to do this. So we are still learning, and we expect it to continue to evolve. Now the concept of master data came from a concept of a golden master. Many of you are experiencing the challenges going through Windows upgrades and things like that. Well, Microsoft as well as Apple run through different releases, Google as well, don't leave anybody out, of releasing versions of the software. And the golden version here that they release is the one that actually gets sent to the manufacturing plant. It's like the opposite of a gold record. You send the record off, it makes the record, everybody hears the recording, and if you made a mistake on the original recording, that mistake will get replicated. Oh goodness, same thing happens here with the data, of course, as well. So in data management, it's the data value that represents the correct answer to the business question. What is the official address of this customer when we want to send them the bill? If we send the bill to the wrong place, it will take them longer to find the bill, pay it, and pay us in that context. So from reference in master data management, the idea is that we're planning, implementing, and controlling activities to ensure the consistency of the golden version of data values. Now, we've used a statistic here that's quite easy to verify on this, and that is that the average organization actually maintains 17 different versions of their customer data. So if your organization maintains fewer than 17 versions, you are above average. That's a very low score, of course. We would prefer that you have one. And that is, of course, the goal of master data management, is to try and get to a single version in that question. When we look at reference data, and again, these are usually considered in conjunction but with much less attention paid to reference data, we're talking now specifically about the domain values or the vocabulary around these items. The standard terms, the code values, the unique identifiers, the business definitions for each value, and that we want to ensure also that these are timely, shared, accurate across all of our data in our organizations. Let me give you a very specific example here. This is an organization that we ran across where they had a, excuse me, a two-letter state code to abbreviate things. So the domain in this case was used to classify data and various other value domains. And in the state of Virginia, where I am right now, it was VA. We also had status orders. So if an order was an order could only have one of four categories. It could be new, it could be in progress, it could be closed, or it could be canceled. But it could not have any other value. It couldn't be on hold. There was no concept of placing an order on hold, and if the concept of placing an order on hold wasn't in the reference data, you could be sure none of the systems that were built would allow you to place the order on hold. Now, the reason this becomes important is because if you were using these 2-digit values and you didn't have them standardized, some people in the organization used GB to indicate Great Britain and not the UK, the United Kingdom, which is the correct method for doing this according to international standards. So if you wanted to get a list of all the customers that were in Great Britain, you might miss the people that were in Scotland, Wales. You get the picture here. Again, very important to have these things in place. And if we move on from there to master data, it's again the same concept here where we're trying to share values across the system so that we know when a invoice is out there, it has only those values that I told you about before, new, in progress, closed, or canceled, and that nobody can put the thing on hold. Now, why might that be important? Well, first of all, if on hold is an important business concept, you need to make sure it's reflected in your master data, because if it's not, you have no ability to come back and make things work in a programmatic fashion. Instead, they work because experts, people who you're working for, local heroes who you're looking to help out on these things, are able to step up and make the system do something that may or may not, in fact, be what you want to have done on that. So master data is, again, about providing context to these various transactions, but not limiting them to predefined values. Now, master data also interacts highly with business rules that allow you to go in and formulate all of these various allowable ranges. And we've used this for years and years from a concept that we call master file management. So again, Gartner holds that this is a discipline or a strategy. It is not a solution to your problems. A strategy is not a solution. The key, of course, for all of this is that when you have this old master set, and again, those of you that are a little bit gray like myself here will remember that your bank used to run your jobs in a batch mode. They would take your previous account balances and they would add in all of the deposits that you had made during the day and subtract out all the checks that you had made from that day in order to go forward. And this was called creation of a master transaction file update. You can see the update program in the bottom right-hand corner there. You might have some error messages that would come out, and the result would be a new master file with a new balance that you could then go forward with the next day. Let me dive down into a more specific component of this as well, and that is that we really do need to look at reference data versus master data just to help everybody understand. Now, this is a slide that I've used for years and years that actually came out of a lawsuit that I was called to be an expert witness in. And the company in question that was in trouble had done a very poor job of doing data conversion. They had looked in the first field and said if it's male, if it's M, then it's male, else it's female. And of course, we all know that doesn't work that way, particularly when you are working in Canada, as we were at the time, where the Canadian Social Security mandated the maintenance of 9 different gender codes. Again, you can see them listed here: male, female, formerly male, now female, formerly female, now male, uncertain, won't tell, doesn't know, male, soon to be female, and female, soon to be male. And this is in the days before Facebook had defined the additional 55 gender codes that they use on Facebook that you can use to self-identify yourself on this. Again, you can't just simply say if male, else female. It doesn't work. Now, the point here from a master data perspective is that the reference data, the domain values, the allowable values in a database for a person's gender were 9, and these were mandated by law. If they didn't maintain them, they were in violation of Canadian law. Now, it turns out our FBI actually maintains the same things as well. The key here, of course, is that the reference data is the fact that we have 9 gender codes. Master data would tell us the gender of your customer whose name is Pat. Again, we can come back to some questions on that, but hopefully that's an example that will be helpful to illustrate it. Notice that both of these things, the reference data as well as the master data, provide the context for the transaction data, so that when customer Pat needs to have something done, we now have values that we can put in place and use. So hopefully you've got a good idea now of what it is to look at master data and reference data. You understand that it is not a technology, that it is a strategy. And that strategy requires partnership between the business as well as IT. It cannot be done in an IT perspective alone. Now, when we look at reference facts, there's actually quite a lot of them. And what we tend to see is that poor quality of reference data creates problems for the financial community as well as others in the environment. What you see here is that when we look back at the oopsie that occurred in 2008, we had values of people not understanding the name of the term income, for example, or you know, how long somebody had been in a home, things like that. So these reference facts were particularly problematic, and organizations had, as we measured them, had a very bad approach to this. One of the more important developments out of the 2008 financial crisis worldwide was the concept of a legal entity identifier. Many people listening on this call have participated, and in fact, I know a couple of you that were actually part of the development work that went into that concept. Because when something happened and somebody said, well, what does it mean to be a Greek bank? Nobody could answer that question because we had very poor master data management around that. And we still see that a lot of firms manage data locally, not according to global standards, and we'd really like to get that number a lot further down. So most initiatives were focused around trying to customize or extend their reference and master data systems in the period immediately following the financial crisis. Now, when we look at master data, one of the things that we discover, and I alluded to this earlier, is that these things are interdependent. Again, if you put master data management technologies into your organization and don't have both data governance and data quality, it's very poor prognosis for signifying the success that you would have within that context. Particularly if you want to talk a little story around it, putting in master data makes perfectly good sense. Some of the data, again, should be treated differently than some of the other data, but that the data governance is the process by which IT and business professionals are then empowered to insist that data going into the MDM system is of at least comparable quality to the data that is outside of the MDM. And hopefully we would try to improve the quality of the data in the MDM. We certainly don't want it to be of less quality than that is in the MDM. I've used this chart in a number of different situations here where we took the quality and, in this case, knowledge management, MDM, operational data, and notice the center of that is also the metadata practices. Again, this is not prescriptive for you. This is simply to show how intertwined these things are. Now, if you haven't got a similar diagram in your organization in the planning stages for the master data management, then I will contend that you don't have enough knowledge of how this works in your organization and that you need to do more specificity before you spend any money on the dollars. Here's another diagram of the same type of concept. In this case, the top part represents sort of harvesting, monitoring types of activities, and the bottom part implements practices around improving these things. Again, the goal here, this is not prescriptive for your organization. Don't take this and say this is what Peter says to do, but you should have a similar level of understanding within this, because what happens and what has happened in our organizations growing is that they started up as siloed pieces. Very rarely do organizations start off with the idea that they need integrated enterprise resource planning systems in order to do all of their work. Instead, what they have are these concepts here where you end up with a payroll system, and the payroll has its payroll data, and the marketing system has its marketing data, and the personnel system has its personnel data, and the manufacturing system has its manufacturing data. This is great, but if you don't plan for these things to be using the same common keys across these entities, this is the basis of master data management, there's no chance it will happen to occur. Again, I'll repeat that. If you don't plan for them to be integratable, the chances that they will be able to be integrated are zero. And of course, what ends up happening is that somebody says, well, I'd like to take this and move it over to here and get these things to integrate with these things. And this is what management really wants to see, are these reports that come together. And many times, these organizations are simply unable to produce this information without great cost and expense. So one of the books that I've written on this subject is Monetizing Data Management. Again, the ability of organizations to gain immediate value from these types of initiatives. Somebody might say, yes, you should put in MDM technologies as a way of improving things. You'll have better data, but the question is, what will that better data translate to in business value? And if you aren't able to articulate that, it can be a very difficult sell. One of the organizations that we helped articulate this value was an organization that was concerned with tanks. Now, this was, as you might imagine, an organization that dealt with petroleum. And they had an option when they implemented one of their systems. It was a broader ERP system that was replacing several what we call legacy systems that were out there. And the problem was, the challenge, I guess, that this organization was facing was that if they implemented the system as is out of the box, which is generally a goal for most organizations, to minimize the amount of modification that needs to occur for these activities. If they were going to do that, then every time the petroleum was transferred from one tank to another tank, it counted as a retail sale. And for these two examples, going into a petrol can or going into a car that had a petrol tank on it, that was perfectly reasonable. But if it was transferred from this tank to the tank that these things were drawn from, that was not a retail sale. Now, I say that because the organization had a choice. They could either modify the ERP package, or the alternative that they were suggested was to gain control over their vocabulary. And if they talked specifically about certain types of tanks and put specific tanks so that only two types of tanks were retail sales and all the others were deemed as, interdepartmental transfers and non-retail, then they have the option of implementing the ERP correctly without modification. And instead of modifying the ERP, they could modify their accounting practices, which turned out to be a lot less expensive because, of course, they didn't have just these three types of tanks. They also had the refinery tanks that they had tanks that floated. Eventually, they had tanks that actually flew. And all of these things became important. And by controlling their vocabulary, they were able to save literally millions by not having to go in and modify the software. And of course, it wasn't just modifying the software the first time. It was modifying the software every time that they released a new version of the software. They had to go back and implement these changes over and over and over again. Now, we also, of course, don't want to confuse those tanks with these tanks. You can imagine this was a different customer and had completely different uses for their tanks. So again, you can see here the value for those tanks were actually quite critical. Turned out in the situation I'm switching to now, we're moving away from the petroleum company to obviously a different type of organization. Each of those tanks spawned 3 million different data values. In fact, I'll quote Peter Miller on this, who said at one point, airplanes are like 17 million parts flying in formation. Tanks are about 3 million parts that are actually rolling in formation in order to do this. And of course, we also don't want to get confused with the term tanks, which is a different piece entirely. Okay, we won't try and do too much of that. Let's regroup here. When we're talking about an architecture for reference data, what we're really looking at here is a management system, and you can see it starts with the business data stewards on the far left-hand side, and the business data stewards working through some sort of code management system. Again, we can refer to the gender codes that we were using before. They're going to implement the reference database of record, something in the organization that is going to permit everybody in the organization to know what the allowable values are for the reference data. You can see there's another component in there as well, externally sourced data. Sometimes you get it from outside the organization. And when you do, that's okay, it'll come in, but you also need to make sure it's reconciled as well, because if it only has 2 gender codes and you're required by law to maintain 9, you can see the problems that are there. Now, notice what happens once you put it in this reference database of record, all the other systems should get the values from it on a regular basis. So there should be nothing in the data warehouse that has any allowable reference data items beyond those which are in the scope of the reference data management system. A master data management system works very similarly. Notice what we have here is, again, the systems of record that go into a master database of record that is also read by the transactional processing systems, the data warehouses, and is eventually pushed out into the various data marts, et cetera, around this. Again, the architecture is not difficult to look at in PowerPoint. However, what you really have to imagine is that you're going from that multiple sources I showed you 2 or 3 slides back, where everything is convoluted and complex, and into a more simplified version of the architecture. And that change can be a wrenching change in the organization, and is usually measured in really annual years of implementation. The first year you try to do certain scope, the next year you add other things to the scope around this process. Some organizations try to implement both of them simultaneously. It's entirely possible to do it like this. This is a more sophisticated architecture showing you in this case that the databases are accessing their values from this centralized master data hub that they have that contains the various values in all this. Now, remember, our definition here is that it is a system. It is a strategy. So nothing's going to happen right away. You can't simply snap your fingers and do this. And if you look at the track record of MDM, we see some things. I love this particular slide. Greg Cohen here says they have 180% failure rate. 99% were less than fully satisfied with them, and 70% even less than just satisfied. They couldn't track or consolidate the data. They had client reference data that was wasted trying to figure out which was the client or who was the client. The motivation in many cases was risk reduction, followed by customer satisfaction. And efficiency and effectiveness only impacted revenue when they got to the end of the day on this. 64% were planning to re-architect their first version of reference data. Half of them had spent more than $4 million a year on it. So again, by applying a 25% inefficiency error, these things can self-fund. And the root causes of these errors here, sorry, I didn't put the numbers up there. Let me just pass that by. Here we go. 30% were regarded as failures. And I showed you earlier the interaction between governance, quality, and metadata as well. But another very important component is that many of these are part of service-oriented architecture implementations. Again, a similarly good concept with a similarly poor track record. 70% of these fail to achieve the business record, the business value, unless you include the MDM. And again, the root cause for failure here, leadership not understanding, misunderstanding the magnitude, treating it as strictly a technology project, thinking that the master data management system was a replacement for either the enterprise data warehouse or the enterprise, ERP that we were looking at, that it's strictly an IT effort, that it's separate from governance, separate from quality, that it's implemented with the wrong technologies, and that really politics and silos impede these initiatives. I'll tell you a story of one that we worked on at one point where we had a group that was very, very well implemented from the finance perspective. Their finance data was handled from an MDM perspective extraordinarily well. The challenge was it was also optimized for use by the finance community within the organization. So what happened was the rest of the organizations started referring to the finance data, the data that was in the governed by the MDM, as data that sucked. Not a good way to describe it under any circumstances. And the leader of the finance organization said quite clearly, you don't like my data, you can't have access to it anymore, and literally shut it down. Now, again, these are organizational politics, and you may think, oh, that never happens at my organization, but I can tell you sometimes we had to wait 2 years for an individual to retire under that before we could, again, go back and make progress along these lines. Now, I've also alluded a couple times here, service architectures clearly are going to need to have access to MDM stacks in order to use them. In addition, I mentioned business rules. We need to understand that really the most important matching that needs to occur is between our master data management system capabilities and our business process capabilities. I'll talk about this for a couple of slides here. First of all, when people are looking at business process engineering, they don't realize that we've got some terrific tools that are out there now where we can allow organizations to much more quickly sit down and come up with what are the existing as-is processes that we're looking at. Again, most organizations, they sit down and they have a blank screen in front of them and they say, okay, tell us about your business processes and what's going on, and people draw them, and you can achieve some good results. We have. But by automating or semi-automating, as the case may be, the process of discovering your existing business processes, it becomes much easier to come up with a target for what the requirements for the master data management system performance characteristics are. It can speed up the processes. It can help you re-engineer the processes at the same time in order to do this. Now, I use this example here because I drive a Prius. And one of the things that Toyota did early on as they were implementing the Prius, really, gosh, mine's in '05. They came out, I think, in '02 or '03 to start, was that everybody looked at the wrong level of granularity around these things. The typical thing was you either have an internal combustion engine or you have an electric engine. And that was the wrong level of granularity, just the same way as you either have, an MDM solution or not. You can actually put in gradual MDM solutions that grow over time, that become more useful, that the scope expands over time. And so just like they were doing with the car engines here, people were trying very much to replace the original engine. What Toyota did was come up with a better way of doing this where they put two engines in the car. And immediately you start to think, two engines in a car? Why would a car need two engines? Well, 20 years ago it was a crazy question. Now many of you have hybrids yourself that you drive. And what it's saying is not that you're using either an electric engine or a gas engine, but that you're able to integrate the two of them together. If you look here on the left-hand corner, you can see the driver's foot is up and down on the accelerator, kicking in this case, the electric motor is running, and it's actually charging the battery because they're putting foot on the brake. There we go. Then we put foot on the gas, and now you see it changes around, and we now start the electric motors going and the gasoline motors going. In other words, by thoroughly understanding the processing of the modern engine, the Toyota company was able to implement hybrid in a way that every other company in the world is following now. It's not either or, it's a question of when is the most appropriate one to put in place. Similarly, our master data management components are equally as important to understand. If we are not able to correctly implement them in ways in which they help the organization go forward, there's not a chance that they're going to work correctly from an organizational perspective. So what you'll see is, again, people saying, oh, that doesn't work, and again, we're not going to use it, et cetera, et cetera. So I love my little hybrid example there, and I think it's a really nice analogy here. So let's talk about what are the goals of an MDM strategy. And the first one is to provide an authoritative source of reconciled, high-quality master and reference data. Again, if you put it out there and you have poor quality data in it, they're going to blame the solution, and it's going to be a very unfortunate outcome. Then the second goal is to lower the cost and complexity through reuse and leverage of standards. Again, I've already mentioned the use of UK for the United Kingdom instead of GB for Great Britain, because if you want to get all the British customers out there, you're not going to get it by trolling and doing data mining on just Great Britain in order to do that. And finally, of course, we'd like to support business intelligence and information integration efforts. I'm doing a talk later this week on big data techniques, and one of the things that people are always asking me about is this data science thing. Well, one of the things we have managed to measure across the past 5 years is that our data scientists are achieving about 20% productivity results. That means if you're paying a data scientist $200,000 a year, you're getting about $40,000 worth of productivity out of them, and that's abysmal. MDM is one of the things that can help you start to move towards that. If you have data scientists who are trying to do things for your organization or any type of an analytics effort, and you have not implemented master data management, guess what? That's one of the first things your data scientist is going to sit down and do. You didn't hire them to do that. You hired them to be a data scientist. Let's talk about the specific activities that need to occur in order to do a good job with this. Again, the first one is to understand the organizational needs that are there, because if we don't understand the needs for it, we have no ability to come up with and select the right types of technologies to put in place. The second one then is to identify specific sources and combinations of reference and master data. If we don't have those combinations, contributors, we're not going to be able to do any of this work in there. Then once you understand the needs and the sources, you can define an architecture. To understand the architectural requirements, you can look at the specific offerings from the specific vendors and look at specific solutions that will allow you to do this. There are many, many different solution types that are out there. And again, if you have some questions on it, there's several of the advisory services that have done a really good job of categorizing them out there for you to do it. You're then going to define and maintain specific matching rules so that you can look at any objective piece of data and say, is it or is it not master data, and therefore start to establish golden records. As you understand these golden records, you can then start to maintain the hierarchies and affiliations. What we're talking about here is the taxonomy and the ontology that your organization speaks in order to do this. And now you can start to expand the scope of your existing efforts. You may have started out by just looking at places and put just places in order to do this. Then you might expand to additional sources, information, particularly if logistics are important to your organization. Then, of course, what you want to do is replicate and distribute this master data so that you have it in a very controlled manner as opposed to an uncontrolled manner, because it doesn't do any good to clean it up once and then have somebody mess it up again. So that's the point of governance that's in there. And then set up a change management process for managing the changes to your reference data. Who knows? Your organization may, as a result of things that are happening out there in the world, be forced to maintain all 55 of the Facebook gender codes as you go forward on this. I'm not predicting that's going to happen, but again, if it is, certainly master data management is one of the techniques that you'll use in order to do that. So again, we're looking for who's needs what information, what data is available from what sources, how does the data from the different sources differ, because we need them sometimes to enrich it, and how are we going to reconcile things that are not consistent, and how are we going to share valid data values. Now, all of this sounds pretty straightforward, 5 easy steps to reference and master data management, right? It's not rocket science, but it is well established. We've been doing this now for enough years that there are good practices out here. And this is the starting point for each of those. I've given you some references at the end here that you can use. Another thing to think about for all of this, of course, is to keep in mind that you've got to have this done in conjunction with your cleansing. You can't put up the MDM and then clean it. Well, I shouldn't say that, because actually I see lots of groups do exactly that. But by gosh, is it a waste of money. If you're going to put the data into something, let's make sure that it is cleaner after it's been processed instead of before it's been processed. I know that sounds just motherhood and apple pie, but I can't tell you how many times we've seen people do this where the technology people are rolling ahead, but the governance people haven't quite caught up with where they need to be in order to do this. So again, let's make certain that these things are integrated, because we need to understand these master data requirements within the context of specific models and documentation. If we don't have these documentation, we don't have the governance process around this, it just becomes somebody saying something and somebody else's opinion is as good as somebody else's. But if you have a model, it actually shows you the dependencies. We can actually do something called cluster analysis, which is a terrific technique invented by Clive Finkelstein that will tell you a proper order in order to build these things out. And not enough people are aware of the work that he did back in the 80s there that was just so valuable on this. Again, this gives us not just reference and master data, but reliable reference and master data. And people start to say, oh, I can rely on that information. I know it's out there. I know it's been cleaned. It is good quality, and I can make business decisions on it. This gives us the ability to produce these golden records, understanding the data lineage that we're going to have in order to produce this information, come up with things that really work in order to do this. And finally, we can start now to develop some measures around this. And if we understand the measures that are there, we have a much better job of getting on with the next piece, which is either an expansion of our existing master and reference data efforts to another part of the organization, to another domain, to another dimension, again, depending on what your business is doing, as opposed to, well, we need to do it because, right? Again, organizations that do this well have no trouble coming up with the next business case for it. By the way, it's also easier to tell the point of diminishing returns where they should stop in order to do this. Again, there's different roles and responsibilities. You're going to have suppliers of data that are out there, consumers of data, and participants that are in there. You'll notice stewards appear consistently throughout the process. Again, very, very critical to make sure that you have an awful lot of this type of knowledgeable expertise in order to do this. This is not new stuff. It is stuff that we really do understand very, very well, and there are some well-established practices. Hopefully you're getting a lot of them from this piece, but we can go a lot deeper as well. From a technological perspective, the first place to look is your ETL environment. If you have a well-run ETL environment, you have tons and tons of metadata that's out there that you can now start to access, understand, and leverage to help support your MDM initiatives. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into organizations and they're like, well, where do we start? It's like, you've got these huge piles of metadata over here with your ETL pieces. Oh, we hadn't thought of that. All right, well, again, I had some good teachers, so I know where to go look, I guess. Again, you want to look at specific reference or master data applications. Many on the market, many master data management applications. Sometimes they are integrated, nothing wrong with that. You are going to need some data modeling tools in order to understand this process, as well as some process modeling tools. And if I have to put a most important on here and most neglected, it is the process modeling tools that people just do not understand how their master data is utilized by the organization. Again, this process architecture work is absolutely critical. Of course, a metadata repository in order to pull all of that together, some profiling technologies and tools. I saw a really terrific one the other day as a group called Trifacta. Very, very interesting set of profiling technologies that we're going to be diving into a little bit more. Maybe we'll do a webinar on those guys at some point. Again, data cleansing tools that we're going to be looking specifically at, integration tools, business process and rule engines. Again, tremendous body of work that's been done on top of that, and do not ignore it. A lot of people say, oh, business rules, they were a thing of the past. No. Ask Ron Ross. He will always tell you he'd rather be the person that writes the rules than the person who has to obey the rules. I hope I quoted you correctly on that, Ron. I know we had it over lunch the other day on that. And finally, our last tool here is change management. If you are not good with change management, many of these activities are going to be much, much more difficult. So we're getting close to the top of the hour here. Let me just run you through some guiding principles as we get ready to turn into the question and answer sessions on this. Again, these shared and referenced master data belong to the organization. Another place that we've had trouble with when we go into organizations is getting them to acknowledge that the data belongs to the organization. If people want to own something, and I'll take this quote directly from Lewis, you guys remember who was co-presenting with me last one of these webinars we did in January. Lewis came up with a really good articulation for this. What you can own if you want to own something, not the data, but you can own the data requirements. And that solves so many arguments and makes a really, really interesting clarification to many of the discussions that we've had year after year with people in order to do this. So the shared master data belongs to the organization, but different parts of the organization can own different requirements, absolutely. It's an ongoing quality improvement program. The goals are not going to be achieved by one project. So when you are done, you have achieved phase 1. There will be a phase 2, phase 3, and a phase 4, and if you don't do it that way, you will stop improving. Business data stewards are the authorities accountable for determining the golden values. So if you don't have a stewardship organization in place, it's very difficult to build your master data management solution out of it. The golden sources will, again, become known as the best sources, and you only want to replicate this master value data from the golden sources. Again, formal change management, we've already talked about it. So our general concepts that we're trying to get to here are you need to have, of course, executive sponsorship, and again, make sure the sponsorship is way beyond IT. I don't mean to say that IT can't do it by itself. I've seen very good implementations, but I've not seen large sustained organizational change without executive sponsorship that spans both the business and the technical organizations in here. Again, the business owns the data, they own the governance process, they own the master data management initiative, or in many cases it's also called a customer data integration initiative along there. You've got to have strong project management, organizational change skills. It's got to be a holistic approach where people, process, and technology all are integrated into one piece, that you build your processes to be continuous and repeatable, supporting continuous improvement. Remember my version 1 comments back at the top of the hour, that you need to have management recognize the importance of dedicated stewards. You can't just add more things to existing business expertise and expect them to do a good job of it. Stewardship is a dedicated profession. You've got to understand the hub model, the architectures that I showed you before. And by the way, those were normative architectures. They were not the ones you should use. They are a good place to say, let's hold this up to our organization and see how it would work here, how it would integrate with your internal sources and your external content providers in order to come up with this. You've got to resist the urge to customize these things. They work really well out of the box, and there's no need to go with them. But stay current with the vendor patches, because, as I said before, this is a relatively new profession when compared to a profession that's been around for several millennia, like accounting. And then, of course, you've got to test, which means fail early, fail often, and do not try to get it perfect the entire way through the first time. I'm going to leave you here with a series of success factors here. Success is likely more observed once the users understand the strengths and weaknesses. So crawl, walk, and run your way approach, small steps in order to do it. Make sure that you're clear on expectations management. The MDM is not going to solve everything, especially not with the first version. But long-term success requires the interaction with information architecture and governance, alignment with your business vision in order to do this, that these frameworks allow you to go through the stages of strategize, evaluate, execute, and review how they're doing. Then we need to make sure we've got high-level business support, vision, and strategy. I mentioned the hierarchy a couple times. It's also a metrics hierarchy. It's important to understand that all of these things build towards objective success that you can measure on an ongoing basis. Business case development never hurts to do that. Get the KPIs right. Measure the situation before and after so that you can show that there is an improvement. Translate the change into metrics and then into financial results. Because if you don't have that so what, it's going to be very, very difficult for anybody to come up with it. And again, it's got to be a joint IT and business initiative. Now I'm going to finish off here with just 2 minutes left and give you an example of one of the best ways I've ever seen of this concept explained. And this is from a fellow named Dave Evans, who was with British Telecom at the time and told us we could use this. I hope I didn't blast your ears out with that. I know my colleague next door is probably going crazy on me. I'm going to run through here again and just narrate it this time without the music. The music is actually quite clever. But let's take a look at what they've actually done here. So get back up to that. And this was a flash animation that was sent to everybody in the organization. And what they did is they said, hey, look, previously information was stored in hundreds of databases across British Telecom. Okay, and processes were duplicated. No, nobody wants to spend money doing the same thing twice when you only need to do it once. And I love this little typical understatement here. It was all a bit messy. You can imagine the British thing on it. So now we're sorting our data. They had 7 master data management piles that they were putting things into. And after watching this, many people could repeat them: user, customer, contract, inventory, product, revenue, and pricing. Very, very simple explanation that went to everybody in the entire company. And they were able to come back and say, oh my goodness, that explains a little bit more what we were doing. So we've spent an hour on this topic. I hope you understand better now what we mean by how to unlock business value from your reference and master data management initiatives. It's key to understand the inputs that are going into this, to understand the activities that are full of it, the tools that you're going to be using, the deliverables that come on the outside of it. And now it's time for your questions and answers as we are right at the 3 o'clock top of the hour. Again, as always, I've pulled in a couple of references here for you guys to take a look at on this, and I will turn it back over to Megan.
All right, now it's time.
Megan?
No, you're fine. They're still good. Now it's time for the Q&A. Time for you all to ask your questions. So just click on the Q&A window feature at the top of your screen. You should be able to submit your questions through that Q&A window. And we started to have some roll in. Someone just wants you to clarify what SOA is for.
Sure. Thank you for the question. We tend to use a lot of acronyms. Service-oriented architecture has been a very popular way of delivering the data that comes with master data management solutions. It's kind of a chicken or the egg. Some people start on service-oriented architectures and realize they need MDM. Some people start on MDM and realize they need to have service architectures. The key for service architecture is that they're trying to deliver services around the organization in the same way that the electrical company delivers electricity to various places, and the Ethernet, the network people, deliver by plugging in. So I have 2 types of plugs here in my office. Here in Richmond right now, one is for electricity and the other is for data. And I plug my data cable into the data cable, and I get data out of the other end of it through the network services, and I plug the electricity in there, and it works as well. And they'd like IT to work just as well. Charlie Betts has written a really terrific book on that subject. I think it's How to Run IT as a Business. It's got some very, very good concepts that are in there. So thanks for the question on that, and I'm sorry I used the acronym.
All right, and next question is, I presume that addressing MDM as a technology play is a bad idea because you have the risk of implementing new technology at the same time as MDM. Do you have any examples where combining MDM with a technology play has not worked, or if it has worked?
Everywhere I've seen it solely as a technology play, it has not worked. And people ask me this question. I do have to say that one of the things that I've done over the past 30 years is examine specifically about 500 different data management program initiatives around the world. So this is not just, Peter looking around and seeing some things, but a very applied scientific study. And if you'd like to read the boring scientific papers that we crank out on this, I'll be glad to point you to them so you can read in more detail. But yes, absolutely. The question is exactly right. When you implement this solely as a technology play, you end up with the question that was back on slide 4 or 5 or something like that, where you hear people saying, well, I don't know how to use the MDM. Right? Well, it's a strategy. You don't use a strategy. Strategy is a series of decisions, a pattern in a series of decisions that are designed to achieve a strategic objective. And if you have your data, customer data, in on average 17 different databases around your organization, and again, many of you are above average. If you have it in only 13 places, you are above average. Of course, where should it be? 1. And that's what we'd like to do, is to try and help people get to that stage. So yes, if you implement it as strictly a technology play, it almost never works. On the other hand, it can work very, very well. I know one very large retailer that we worked with that implemented this from a financial perspective, and it was much easier for them to come to grips with the monthly closings and the quarterly closings and the year-end closings and all this sort of thing by implementing master data around their financial data first, and then they expanded it to some other areas. And are still in the process, even I think this is now 6 years later, of actually getting some very good expansion and additional activities, because what they saw was, wow, that really helped the finance data. I wonder if we could put it in the location data as well. Oh, look, it helps there. Now let's try and manage our person's data, our party data with this. And again, expanding it in different ways as the organization got better with the capabilities, understood the strengths and weaknesses of the technology, and were able to create a group of people, both business and IT, who were better at doing this than they had been when they started? Again, great question. Thanks.
All right, the next question is, how does one pick the best MDM platform? What are the criteria and what should I stay away from?
No, it's kind of like asking what's the best car. You need to find out, first of all, what are the MDM needs of your organization? And if you can't specify those needs, any solution is going to get you there, but not necessarily with the optimal cost. So very, very critical to go through the steps. And I'll actually jump back a couple slides here just so we can review them for folks. Again, a very, very nice approach here that we use in order to come up with this, which is, let's see if I get the right slide here. Oops, sorry. Go. Understand your existing needs that are out there. Look at your sources and contributions, and from those two pieces, define your architecture from an MDM perspective. You don't have to get your whole information architecture in place, but you do need to have that. Then, and only then, pick up the telephone and start to call people about what's going on. Now, one of the nice things are there are a series of conferences. I mentioned Enterprise Data World coming up, where you're going to have probably, gosh, I'm thinking, Shannon, we usually pull in about 200 different companies that are there, people who are all really anxious to talk to you about what's worked really well in their organization and what challenges that they succeed. I mean, the whole purpose of the conference is for all of us in the data management community to exchange this information. Because, as soon as you put yourself out there on the market and say, hey, I want to buy an MDM solution, you'll have all the big vendors coming at you and saying, here, let us sell you your MDM solution. You're going to be a much smarter customer if you have done these 4 steps prior to that. And again, I'm absolutely suggesting that talking to people at the upcoming Enterprise Data World Conference is going to be an excellent way of gaining some really first-hand information on this. If I haven't mentioned it, it's in Washington, D.C. We're real excited this year because it looks like it's going to be one of our biggest conferences ever. We generally have about 1,200 to 1,400 people that are at this event. So there's no shortage of your ability to find good sources of expertise, both coming from the stage and also in the birds of a feather session that people will have. If you still don't know anybody else, send me an email and I'll introduce you to some of the folks that are going to be talking there on this subject, and you can get a lot more data on that.
All right, the next question is, are there types of master and reference data? Do we need to categorize these further into subcategories?
Yes, great question. I went quickly over that piece, but one of the things we talked about was the hierarchies that need to occur in here. So if you look at the general definition of MDM, Master Data Management, categories, you can see again, parties, places, things. As soon as you start to define those pieces, you're starting off at, if you will, a root level of these things. Again, thing may be the highest level that's in there. But what you are going to start to do then is to define the extended attributes and the hierarchies and the relationships that occur between these things. And these are steps towards your organization's taxonomy or ontological behavior. Let me give you a specific example that's been very helpful for this. I've bought 2 cars in my life, and both times when I buy the car dealer turns around and tells me that my car is on sale the next month after I've bought it, and I go back and I say, hey, I want the sale price, and they say, haha, you already bought it. Well, that's not really good customer relationship management. What's happening here is that the car dealer, bless their heart, is sending a notice to their customers that they're having a sale. Now, if we really think about this, it's not so much that they're having a sale that they want to tell, but they want to tell one type of customer that they're having a sale. So I'm not going to draw this out, but what it is that you have a customer who is a current customer, and you also have a customer who is a potential customer. A current customer might be defined as somebody who has bought a car, or maybe who has bought a car in the last year, or in the case of a Toyota, maybe the last 5 years. You don't want to turn around and tell them that the car they bought last week is now on sale. But it's perfectly reasonable message to send that information out to a customer who has not yet become your customer. So it makes perfectly good sense to look at a hierarchy of customer being the highest level and then underneath customer, defining it further into current customers and potential customers. And people go, oh, okay, I get it. So we're going to create a hierarchy, and we're going to treat potential customers differently than we're going to treat current customers. Absolutely, great, no problem. We're in good shape. Now, try and fit in the concept of X-customer into that. Are X-customers part of current customers who are no longer current customers, or are X-customers really somebody who should be a previous customer but not a current customer? And again, it gets very, very complex from that point, not hugely complex, but something that's worth having a discussion about, because if you don't have a uniform method of treating people in this way, you're going to end up with challenges. And I pick on the car dealers for doing this to me repeatedly as I buy my new cars over the years. I bought 2 new cars over the course of my lifetime so far, so it's not exactly a 100% sample, but certainly an interesting one. So again, a great question there. Yes, your master data management is not just defining nouns, but it's defining the nouns, the attributes that are associated with those nouns, and the hierarchies that those nouns use, combining to make up the organization's vocabulary. Again, great question. Thank you for expanding on that.
Okay, and the next question is, how do you bring the executives to the sponsor table when the executives believe it's an IT project?
Well, it's tough. First of all, the other thing that I've done over the course of my career is study IT failures. And IT failures have just been disastrous in most organizations. So I'm going back to this chart here, and I guarantee you somebody in your IT organization has a chart as well that looks kind of like this, that says, well, when we want to get the data from the widget, it goes through the whoosy what's it and goes around to the hoonky dookie, and then we've got Fred over in the basement that actually runs this sort of process, and we hand it over to Frida, who then makes it pretty enough so that executives can consume the data. And most people will go, oh, that's not a really good way to run a railroad, is it? No, it's really not. So find a way of describing your existing system, and that while IT is perfectly qualified to implement the software in a very, very good manner, they are not the ones who are going to understand the business process architecture that you need to have defined in order to match the outputs of the MDM system with the business needs called for by the ongoing operation of the business. Again, it's got to be a joint effort. If it's not a joint effort, there's very low chances of succeeding in either initiative.
Okay, and the next question is, you provided some best practices, but the success percentage of MDM implementation is low. What are the absolute must-have factors for a successful implementation?
Great question. Let me flip back to that slide on the best practices there. The real key, first of all, is the steps that I started to take you through on this slide. We already came back to it once, which is the understanding the existing systems, understanding the sources and contributions, and only after you understand these 2 first pieces here are you at all going to be able to go in and describe an architecture. And if you don't have the architecture, you shouldn't be conversing with vendors about products. So that's the first piece that needs to occur in there as well. Then in terms of the practices on this, yeah, it's okay to get executive sponsorship. Every good project needs executive sponsorship, but you really have to define and understand that there's got to be a governance organization that is functional. And I don't mean a super high functioning governance organization, but you've got to have the bones in place. You've got to have the governance appreciated by the business as making improvements to the way in which IT and the business both achieve the organizational shared objectives. I've got a couple organizations that I'm working with right now that over-implemented data governance, for example. Very, very well-intentioned, but they bureaucratized the process, and now it's, data governance just slows down our IT systems. If it's a perception that way, it's not going to work. So you want to have a governance organization that is appreciated by the business. That would be the second criteria, I'd say. So the first criteria is follow the steps. Second one is very definitely make sure that you have a governance organization that is capable of delivering recognized business value. And then the third piece is do your homework in there and understand how you're going to achieve business value from that MDM implementation. If you don't have a good plan for that monetization section, it's going to be very, very difficult to have anybody look at the effort in a year or 2 from now and say, yes, you achieved your objectives, or no, you didn't. The fact that you have a golden master for all your customers, what does that really mean? Well, if it's reducing the amount of time that it takes to be in contact with your customers, that's great. If it's making your data scientists in your organization more productive, that's good. But if the data scientists only deliver $1 million value and your MDM costs $2 million, you've still got a problem there. So again, trying to get to that business case with those activities is very definitely the way I would say are necessary but insufficient criteria for success.
Okay, the next question is, how do you keep the organization's attention from drifting off of MDM to other priorities?
Great question, because they do drift, don't they? Most organizations have multiple things going on. I worked for one organization where they told me they wanted to have self-service in data. And I said, wow, that's a really novel goal. I've never seen anybody successfully implement that before. Why? And they said, well, we've actually got 1,200 IT projects going simultaneously. And when I looked at the size of their IT organization, I said, maybe that's not what your problem is. Maybe you should cut down on the number of things you're trying to do simultaneously. Again, these are organizational practices that you have to look at holistically. If you've already got moved to the cloud, implement an ERP, change all of our software platforms from Java to Swift, it's probably not the right time to throw something else on the fire as well. Again, there's a timing issue. And just like everything in technology, the longer you wait, the more mature the space is, the better the stories will be, the more we will have best practices developed in these areas, and that will be much more helpful to you in the long run than it will be to try and throw something else in at the same time. So yeah, look at your portfolio. If you've got 1,200 IT projects going on and you're being successful with it, I'd stop right there. I wouldn't add one more.
Okay, the next question is, how do you address the perception that MDM equals data quality? C-level executives think that since we have an MDM project, we also have data quality.
So that's where the measures come in, and we talked about this earlier on. Again, if you're not defining what the criteria for success in your project is, then it's very difficult to do. So a separate goal is implement the MDM technologically. However, if you implement the MDM technologically without doing data quality, you've got a great solution, but it's not going to help overall because now you've taken all of your data that is of unknown quality and put it in one place. Okay, it'll be easier to clean, but it won't help. So I mentioned expectations management a couple times in here. As these things are being sold to management, as you're trying to get support for them, or the vendors are coming in to support the project, the absolute key is to say the goal is not to implement the MDM. The goal is something that produces business value. And if you don't have something that produces business value as a result, you have a very nice technology, but it's going to be a very expensive technology. So concentrate on what the business value is from the MDM solution. If the MDM solution is designed to improve the quality, measure that quality and say, when we put the MDM in, we should be able to identify a customer, a 360 view of the customer with 1 or 2 seconds, but not anything beyond that. Again, it can be the concept that an MDM solution may reduce the amount of uncertainty that's associated with making business decisions. Again, you can measure these things, but if you don't have those measurements, you will be unable to really achieve the business value that we're trying to get to. Again, great question, I think.
All right, we've had a lot of questions roll in, so we'll see what we can cover. And again, if we don't get to anything today, we'll include them in the follow-up email. And we had a question come in through Twitter. Are there any ways in which organizations can assess the benefits from their MDM effort?
It's a good question. Hopefully that's been the theory of the entire webinar today. I've got a book out on that. It's a very short book, less than 100 pages, called Monetizing Data Management. And the key to that book is to try and give you all a number of different ways of understanding how to get the benefits from this thing. You should not implement MDM or data quality or cloud or anything else in technology because it's cool, because it's better, but because it results in significant business value. If you don't have the ability to draw that line between a specific improvement and a result in the business world and a component of your strategy, right? Faster, better, cheaper, whatever it is you're trying to achieve, then you should not be doing it at all. And yet too many of these things are sold on exactly that premise. Oh, everybody else has an MDM, so you should get one too. And again, remember, the game of telephone is difficult. Executives are talking to each other, maybe on the golf course, we'll make it very stereotypical. And when, person says, hey, I got better sales this year. Oh, how'd you do that? Well, I don't know. They put this MDM thing and it made sales better. Well, that represents an understanding, but not a very precise understanding. And the organization that can say, yes, the reason we have better sales this year, improved sales, is because we don't have to search forever to find out what our customer needs are. We have our customer needs in one very specific place, and when we added them up, we found out that this type of widget was selling better than that type of widget, or this type of sales approach was more successful than that type of sales approach, et cetera, all ways that you can go through and understand the implementation on this. If you can't tie it to business value, it's a very dubious proposition, and you run the risk of your effort being not well understood.
Okay, and the next question is, are businesses struggling to define business justifications for an MDM implementation with clear ROI? Any thoughts?
I don't think so. Now maybe I'm working with a select set of businesses here, but most people that I work with in this space have very clear business objectives that they're trying to get to. Again, they don't want it because it is the goal. They want better business outcomes, and MDM is something that will help them get towards that goal. Notice I didn't say solve the problem, and I guess that's the biggest misinterpretation of these things, is that most often they're sold as buy this thing and all your problems will be solved. Well, the only silver bullet that we know of is that there is no silver bullet. So don't ever believe that a single technology is going to solve all of your business problems. But if you have business problems that involve things like I can't tell, and again, I'm not sure the gender of your customers is going to be specific on this, but you can't tell, where your customers live, what geographic areas they have, what stores they shop at, what buying habits that they have. It's going to be very difficult to implement your business strategy regardless of what your business strategy is. So you do need to have that perspective that says, I've got to have a direct line between spending this much money, investing this investment over here, producing these technology outcomes that then lead to business outcomes. If we aren't able to unlock the business value that we have in there, then it becomes just a technology piece, and people are just as easily going to misinterpret it as they are going to be able to correctly interpret it.
Okay, and the next question is, what industries besides financial services have the most frequently implemented MDM strategies and environments?
Well, I've seen an awful lot go on in the logistics industries, and I'll say that broadly. It's trucking, it's again, logistics support, package delivery, et cetera, et cetera. Location information is huge. We have a new phrase that we call SOLO-MO, which is social, location, and mobility, all combined to give new business capabilities that are out there. And almost anything that's falling into that category is coming up with some very, very specific details. Obviously, imagine the government is going to be specifically interested in that, and in fact, the Department of Interior has done some really terrific work in that area. If you look on their website, you'll see some things. So from a government perspective, they've been really, really good. We've been working here in the Commonwealth around some of those initiatives as well, and our Secretary of Technology, Karen Jackson, has done some really, really good work getting the agencies mobilized around exactly this type of an activity in there. So I don't think it's specific just to the financial industry, but certainly the financial industry has invested more in it recently.
Okay, the next question is there, can you walk us through possible steps to engage IT and business to coordinate on stewardship?
So it's really a different conversation, but if you use MDM as an excuse to have a conversation around stewardship, it's a great conversation. One of the things we like to do with organizations is just bring them in for a brown bag and talk to them about things and say, okay, so I'm putting up my slide 30 here, which has the data governance, data quality, and master data on it. Again, we're thinking that master data management might be a solution to some of the challenges that we have. But we as IT could implement master data management very, very well, but if we don't have the other two legs of the stool, the data governance and the data quality pieces, it's going to be very difficult for us to demonstrate the business value that we need to have in order to come up with this. So it's a great you know, like I said, lunchtime conversation, brown bag conversation, to just sit around and say, so what would the role of governance be in that? And well, one of the things is that governance is a really good body to look at for coming up with your measures. So we would say, well, let's put up master data management on the idea that it's going to make our data 30% better than it currently is. I'm pulling a number out of thin air, but if you measure your data and you find it's currently at level X, and you then can improve it by 30% with master data management initiatives, that's terrific, okay? And say that, so the governance says, well, this is what we're looking for. We're trying to achieve a 30% improvement. How are we going to achieve that improvement? Well, if we don't have the ability in this case to take quality components into that as well and put some quality pieces in it, there's no way that we'll be able to do this even with governance. So the three of us have to work, the three groups, data quality, data master, and master data and data governance, all in concert, have to work all in concert in order to make this successful, because quality can't do it by itself, governance can't do it by itself, and certainly MDM can't do it by itself either.
All right, next question is, can you elaborate on the link between R/MDM with big data? Most firms aren't paying attention to this critical need.
Excellent question. And again, what we're seeing is so much of the hype that's around big data, people are thinking that it is a solution unto itself. Of course, if you can't even define it, it's going to be very difficult to achieve business value from it. So reference and master data is another technique that can help to implement big data. And I mentioned the talk I'm doing later this week on that. One of the key points I'm going to be making there is that if your big data technology solution doesn't have the ability to do what I call identity management, which is really master data management in that context, there's no ability at all to really leverage the power that you have in master data management. So very, very important component. Yes, I see an awful lot of organizations that are trying really hard with big data and doing things nicely, but at the same time having problems within that area. So again, good point. Thanks for bringing that one up.
All right, let me find the question. I just lost it. Hold on one second. Here.
You guys picture Megan. She's actually got 4 different arms. That's how she's holding all this stuff together.
Yeah, I'm actually an octopus. It's true. Let's see.
Actually, between you and Shannon, you've got 4 arms. So.
That's true. Oh, someone asked, are there any good resources you could recommend for data management for higher education?
Yes. Our friend Eva Smith up in the Pacific Northwest, I'm trying to remember what university she's at, has done some really interesting grant work that she's working on. Also, you'll see the work at DAMA International has done some things, and they're coordinating both of those efforts. I know I'm tossing out names here for you. If you want some more specifics, by all means, give us a shout and an email on it, because we certainly would love to get your feedback and get people involved in these things. One of the things we have a challenge around is that the curriculum that we have currently in colleges and universities teaches people very well how to build new databases. And between us guys on the call and everybody else in the world that's listening in, if there's a skill we don't need in the world right now, it's how to build more databases. So I'd like to change that, and I'm working real hard with a number of groups to try and do it. But again, Eva and DAMA are both working on that as well.
All right, great. I think that's all the questions we have for today. Thank you, everyone, for participating in today's event. We hope you have enjoyed it. Thanks again to Dataversity and Shannon for hosting us. Once again, you will receive today's materials within the next 2 business days. Our webinar next month will be Data Architecture Requirements. Hopefully, you'll be able to join us for that as well. As always, feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
And I hope we see you all at Enterprise Data World coming up in just a couple weeks after the next webinar. So thanks, everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter, for another fantastic presentation, and Megan, thank you as always, and thanks to all of our attendees who are so engaged in everything that we do and love all the questions. It's just fantastic. And I echo Megan, and I hope everyone has a great day.